G'day, my name is Pete. Welcome back to the channel. So increasingly we'll be finding over the next few weeks that we'll be talking a lot more about what are called contact tracing apps. And that's because whether we live in the US or here in Australia, the governments are going to ask us to download one of these apps to enable us to share our whereabouts with other users that have downloaded the apps, or at least the apps themselves. And as is the case here in Australia, we'll be asked to actually upload that data to the government to allow them to run analytics on that information. So I thought I'd make a quick video and first of all explain exactly what contact tracing is, why it's effective and how it works, and we'll also go through some of the apps. So the app in the US is being developed by a fairly unique partnership between Apple and Google, which between the two of them they account for almost 100% of the smartphone market. Here in Australia, the government looks like it's going to go with an app developed in Singapore, which is called Trace Together. There's other apps out there as well though. So in Israel, they're developing an app that they've asked residents to download, which is called the Shield or Hamagen. There's also an open source app out there. It's developed by MIT Media and it's called Safe Paths. So stay tuned. As I said, my name's Pete. You're watching Ahead of the Curve. Okay, firstly, let's have a look at why governments are looking at contact tracing. So to begin with, I completely agree with contact tracing. Actually, I think we should have been doing this a very long time ago. I mentioned in my previous video titled The Missed Opportunity, where I was basically saying that we're an island. We've got a unique opportunity, or we had a unique opportunity, in that there's only two ways to get into Australia. It's either through the seaports or the airports. Unlike regions in Europe or other countries where the borders are fairly blurred, there's really only those two ways to get in. So what we should have been doing very early, a lot earlier, the first, it was I think the 31st of December or the 1st of January when China alerted the World Health Organization about a new novel coronavirus that they didn't know how to treat, that was getting out of control. I think the first case outside of China was on the 22nd of February, which was in the Philippines. So around those times, we should have been putting a thermometer on each person's head as they came in, either coming off a plane or off a ship, to number one, check their temperature. We should have been giving them an information brochure about isolation and etc. And we should have been taking their telephone numbers so that we could text them with information about what to do and when and how to self-isolate, etc. So, and if there was a breakout on a ship that they'd just come off, we could have alerted them and let them know to get tested, etc. So this is something we should have been doing, in early February, if not late January. It's a missed opportunity. If we did this, we may have had basically no cases or a very small amount of cases in Australia. Some people will say that's unrealistic, look, yes, the disease has spread to pretty much everywhere, but there's not too many countries that are islands, and we had a double opportunity. Not only are we an island, but we had quite a few weeks, even a couple of months before we saw cases here in Australia. So we had a bit of time to prepare for this, but no point crying over spilt milk. We can only do what we can do now, and we've done really well, especially over the last few weeks, in having a fairly effective lockdown, which has managed to keep this somewhat under control. So why are governments doing this? They're doing it basically for two reasons. So number one, it's for a way to get the economy going, and the only way to get the economy going is to get people back out onto the streets, back out into businesses and doing what they do. Now, there's really, whether governments will admit to this or not, every government is in effect going down the route of herd immunity, whether they admit it, as I said, or not. So our government will say, no, that's not our policy, but it's not what governments say, it's what they do that you need to look at. And what in effect every government is doing is they're pursuing a policy of partial herd immunity. And I think the idea there is to quarantine or keep away people with underlying conditions and the elderly, who are much more likely to get seriously sick from this. But the idea, I think, is to let the population out nice and slowly, try and prevent any major flare-ups But basically you've got to at some point get the economy going and let people get out of the house at some point. Obviously the ideal way to do that from a health perspective at least is not to do that until we have an effective vaccine, or at least some sort of a therapeutic drug to be able to treat this effectively. So the governments really only have two options. We can wait, and I think this was the point that the New South Wales Premier made, that we should stay home until a vaccine is available. So we can go down that route, and that may be a very long time. So I don't think in history there's ever been a vaccine that's been created in response to something like this sooner than 12 or 18 months. That said, there's never been such an impetus. Pretty much everyone that can is looking at trying to solve this and try and find a vaccine. So who knows, we might get a vaccine in 8 months' time or 10 months' time. But so that's really the only two options. You either wait for a vaccine or you do a staged rollout, which is basically a policy of partial herd immunity. So you let the young people get out who are less likely to catch the virus, and if they do catch it, they're less likely to have severe symptoms, and the idea is that they'll be able to gain immunity to the virus through having fairly minor symptoms, and those that have fairly major symptoms, the idea is that because there's only a few of them going out at any one point in time, the health system will be able to cope with those. So I think that's the policy. So you need a tool to be able to put that policy into effect, and really that's what this is. It's a tool to be able to allow a staged rollout of going out of lockout, and to be able to manage it in some shape or form. In fact, I think it's a very effective way of trying to keep the virus from spreading. So let's have a look at what is contact tracing. So contact tracing, as the name suggests, it's all about tracing who you've come into contact with if you are, or if you have been tested COVID-19 positive. So the idea is that if you're in this spot, and let's say we open up the economy and you can get out of the house now. So there's your house. And you go out of your house, and now you come into a few people there, then you go here, you come into a few people there, and then you go there and you come into contact with a few people there. The idea is to know all the contacts that you've come to contact with. So in case at this point, let's say at this point here, let's say you get tested and you become CV-19 positive. There we go, positive. Then what they can do is they can backtrace everyone that you've been in contact with, let's say over the last 14 days, as some of these apps do, to let all those people know to self-isolate and to let them get tested. This was a very effective policy. It's worked really well in South Korea, and it's one of the reasons why they've managed to keep a lid on the spread of the virus. One thing that they did do wrong is they let people get out a little bit too early, a little bit maybe dangerously too early, some will report, but they were really good at keeping a lid on this because of this back tracing. Now the way they did it is they had people's GPS information from people's mobile phones, and that's how they were able to do it. And it's worked really well. So how has it worked? Well, this is how contact tracing works. So let's assume that's you there, and let's say you come into contact with 3 people, and let's say those 3 people come into contact with another 3 people, and so on and so forth. So you can see very quickly it goes from 1, 3, 9, 27, 81 people that you've come into contact with, and that's only assuming that each of those 3 people have come into contact with 3 others. So some might have come into contact with 9 or 10 people, and then it can spread even faster. So this gives you an idea of why it is that the virus can spread exponentially. So the way contact tracing helps is, let's say you've been identified to have been CV-19 positive. So now you backtrace everyone you've been in contact with, you let everyone know, and let's say you found out, so after all these people have been let know to either self-isolate or get tested, and let's say this person's gone out and got tested and they've been found to be CV-19 positive as well. So then they can let everyone else know, and if you do this fast enough and early enough, and that's why the importance of the tests coming back quickly enough is so crucial, especially once we let people back out into the economy. It means that you could potentially let all these people know in advance and early enough before they have a chance to spread it onto another 3 people and so on. So that's how you can spread the that's how you can prevent the exponential spread of the virus. So now that we know how contact tracing works, let's have a look at how the different apps work. So let's start with the Apple and Google partnership. Like I said, this is a huge partnership. These 2 behemoths account for almost 100% of the smartphone market, which is crucial. The way they're proposing for this to work is initially to release an API, which is an application programming interface, which allows developers to build apps upon this interface to allow for this to all function. Now, they're saying they're only going to release the APIs to health departments and government departments, no one else, which is good. And what they're also saying is that they're going to build into the system discretion, user discretion, so that even if the health department or even if the developer who's making the app wanted to make this mandatory, they physically can't. So the programming will prevent mandatory take-up. Which I think is good. I think we need to respect people's privacy, and there will be a lot of we'll hear a lot of talk from privacy lobbyists and similar organisations lobbying against this, and I'm sure they all have very good points. So I think we definitely should make it voluntary. And the thing is though, this has to have a fairly large take-up. So yes, we should make it voluntary, but we should compel people to download the app and use it, because there are some reports that you need to, I think in Singapore they had a 40% take-up rate. Some people are saying it really needs a higher take-up rate of maybe 60 or even 80% to be truly effective. So that means that 60 or 80% of the population would have to download the app. Now that's a big ask. Some people don't even know their passwords to their app stores, and you know, people that aren't that savvy with technology may not know how to use the app. They may be suspicious about it, all the rest of it. So I think Apple and Google have got a very good solution to this, which is going to be the next stage of the rollout, where they're proposing to integrate the functionality into the actual iOS, into the actual operating systems, whether it's Google's operating system or Apple's. And what this will do is, first of all, there'll be interoperability between the 2 systems, so that the Google and the Apple operating system can talk to each other, which is obviously crucial. And then the second advantage is that presumably once it's baked into the operating system, when you upgrade your software, all you'll presumably be asked to do is to select yes or no whether you wish to opt in or opt out, which is obviously a lot simpler rather than downloading a whole app, and will hopefully lead to a much higher take-up. And as I said, some people are saying we need 60 or 80% of the population to take this on. One of the disadvantages, I think, of the Australian system that we're proposing to use, which is, as I said, called Trace Together, developed in Singapore. So I think in order to get that take-up rate above 40%, which is what it was in Singapore, to get it above 40% in Australia, we're going to be hearing a lot from our politicians to try and encourage us to download this app. Now, there are some pros and cons. I'll include some links to the different articles in the description section below, so you can read about it all yourself. But essentially one of the biggest, another advantage, to put it that way, that I see with the Google and the Apple system is that it's going to be decentralized, which means the information is only ever going to be kept in a cryptographic form, in a form that only the phone can read, and it's only going to be kept on the phones, rather than being uploaded to a central authority like a government, health department, etc. So anytime you upload or you have information in a central spot, there is only that one point of failure, and there is only that one point that you need to get into for hackers or others that are looking to exploit this information. Also, Apple and Google are suggesting that this random IDs that the apps will generate will essentially cease to exist, or will change every 15 minutes, which is quite handy. We don't know how long, so the Trace Together app from Singapore that we're going to be using here in Australia, that one we're not sure. I couldn't find how long it takes before the IDs are scrapped and new ones are generated. But what's more concerning is that the information is going to be uploaded to the Department of Health, I presume, for them to run analytics on that information. And look, I've got no problem, especially if it leads to saving lives, for that to happen. But you just got to make sure that you put preventative measures around this. And look, governments, we've seen what's happened with, there's a reason why we still have voting that we do physically rather than it being done online, because systems crash. We've seen it numerous times. Just recently, for instance, Victoria has gone back to school, but they're doing all their learning online, and first day back at school and the systems have all crashed. So by having all your information in one centralized location, it means that a hacker, all they need to do is get into that one point, and then they've got access to the data. One of the advantages, as I said, of the Apple and Google system is that the information is decentralized. It is just kept on all different people's phones, and it's encrypted. And I think that's you would, in order to get everyone's data, you would have to actually hack into a whole lot of people's smartphones, presumably, rather than just having one point to attack. So that's definitely the advantage of a decentralized system. The other advantage, as I said, is that it will be baked into the operating system and might save people having to download an app, which will be safer. Hopefully, there won't be too many other pretend apps in different app stores, or different people sending out different links asking you to download an app and pretending that it's a CV-19 app and then hacking into your phone, etc. So there's a lot of things to think about here, and we just want to make sure that we get it right. Obviously, there's an urgency here, so the sooner we can get the app to work, the sooner we can perhaps start experimenting with this partial unlocking of the economy and letting people back out to the public. So we'll have to have a tool to be able to manage that. I think this is a good tool. I've got a feeling, just from what I've read so far, which hasn't been much, I seem to be favouring the Apple and the Google system rather than the Trace Together system. But hey, I think anything's better than nothing. So I'll be watching to see what the details are around all this. That's it from me for now. If you found this helpful, please do share the video with anyone else that you think might find it helpful. If you did find it helpful yourself, please give it a thumbs up. Please make sure you subscribe so you can get alerted to these types of videos as and when they come out. I mainly talk about trying to stay ahead of the curve, but also my main topic of conversation is renewable energy, mainly as it relates to sustainable transport, mainly Tesla cars, but I do different topics such as this one when they're warranted. So as I said, that's it from me for now. So hopefully you've got some value out of it. As always, stay safe, stay sustainable, and stay ahead of the curve. Ciao.